Hello everyone, welcome to our Comments and Answers TJ channel. I hope all of you are doing well. In this video, we are going to prepare for the book study, Complete Testimony, for the week of December 2nd to 8th. This week, we will study chapter 19, paragraphs 1 to 5, and the boxes on pages 149 and 150. So, let's get started. Questions 1 to 3. What was Paul's purpose in going to Corinth, and what might have concerned him? Paul went to Corinth to preach about God's kingdom, not to do business or look for work. Although he needed a place to stay and make money, his main objective was to speak about God to the people. Paul did not want to be a burden to anyone or give the impression that he was taking advantage of others just by preaching. This might have concerned him, since in such a large city full of people, it would be difficult to find work and a place to stay. Despite these worries, Paul knew that the most important thing was to preach God's message. Additional comments. Although Paul knew his mission was to preach, he did not want to take advantage of others. He didn't want people to think that he was living at their expense just because he was preaching about God. That's why he decided to find a job to make an honest living. This attitude shows how Paul prioritized his spiritual work, but also made sure not to be a burden to anyone. His example teaches us to be responsible and balanced, without neglecting the most important thing, witnessing our faith. Questions 4 and 5, Part A. Where did the Apostle Paul stay while he was in Corinth, and how did he make a living? Paul stayed in the house of a married couple named Aquila and Priscilla, who were Jews. They had lived in Rome, but moved to Corinth due to an order from Emperor Claudius that forced Jews to leave Rome. Thanks to them, Paul found a place to stay and also a job. Additional comments. Paul was able to stay in the home of Aquila and Priscilla, a kind couple who, like him, had to flee Rome because of persecution. Thanks to their hospitality, Paul not only found a place to live, but also the opportunity to work with them making tents. This shows how good relationships with fellow believers can help us in difficult times. Sometimes, when we are in a new city or in a complicated situation, God places people in our path to help us continue with our mission. Questions 4 and 5, Part B. How did Paul know how to make tents? Although Paul had received a very good education, he had also learned manual work, such as making tents. This was not unusual at the time, as many Jews learned a practical trade in addition to their academic education. Paul was from Tarsus, a city famous for producing a special type of cloth called cilicium, which was used to make tents. It's possible that he learned this trade when he was young. Additional comments. Paul did not only rely on his education or his status, he also knew how to do manual work. Sometimes, people think manual labor is less important, but Paul shows us that all work is dignified if done with honesty and dedication. Furthermore, Paul was not afraid to get his hands dirty to continue preaching the message of Jesus. Despite being an educated man, Paul never saw his trade as something shameful, but rather as a practical way to maintain his independence while still sharing the gospel. Corinth, a city with two ports. The ancient city of Corinth was located on a narrow strip of land connecting two major areas of Greece, the mainland and the Peloponnesian Peninsula. This special location gave Corinth a strategic advantage, as it was close to two important ports. These ports helped merchants move goods between different places such as Italy, Spain, Syria, and Egypt, without having to sail around the dangerous waters south of Greece, where strong winds made navigation perilous. Because of this, ships coming from different places, especially those crossing the sea, preferred to stop in Corinth. Instead of navigating the dangerous southern waters, they unloaded their cargo at one port, transported it overland to the other port, and loaded it onto another ship. Sometimes, if the ship was small, they would move it entirely from one port to the other. This made Corinth a very wealthy city, but also a place where many vices were seen, as ports always attract people from different regions and cultures, and often promote unhealthy behaviors. In Paul's time, Corinth was the capital of the Roman province of Achaia and one of the most important centers of commerce and administration in the region. The city was not only famous for its commerce, but also for its cultural and religious diversity. There were temples dedicated to Greek, Egyptian, and even one dedicated to the Roman emperor. This mix of religions reflected the variety of people who lived there: Greeks, Romans, Jews, and others. Additionally, there was a Jewish synagogue in Corinth, indicating that there was also an active Jewish community in the city. Despite being a center of trade and culture, Corinth was also known for its vices. Because it was such an important port, many people came to do business, but also to enjoy the pleasures of life, which often led to immoral behavior. This gave Corinth a reputation for being a difficult place to live according to Christian principles, something Paul had to face while preaching there. Near Corinth, in a place called Isthmia, the Isthmian Games were held every 2 years. These games were a major sporting event, almost as important as the Olympic Games in Greece. It was an event that attracted many people, from athletes to visitors from all parts of the world, making Corinth even more crowded during those times. It's interesting to note that Paul used a sports example in one of his letters to the Corinthians. It's possible that Paul was in Corinth just when these games were taking place, and this may have influenced his decision to use sports as a metaphor to explain the discipline and effort needed to follow Christ. By comparing the Christian life to a race or a sporting competition, Paul took advantage of a very popular event to teach the Corinthians about the importance of perseverance, self-discipline, and the struggle to attain the prize of eternal life. Paul's letters to the Thessalonians. Paul spent about 18 months in Corinth, a time during which he wrote several important letters. Among these letters were those written to the Christians in Thessalonica. The first of these letters, 1 Thessalonians, was the first letter Paul wrote, and that was included in the Bible. In this letter, Paul encouraged and comforted the believers because, after he and Silas had preached in Thessalonica, many of the new Christians faced persecution from the Jews. Although Paul wanted to return to see them, he couldn't, so he sent his companion Timothy to see how they were. When Timothy brought good news about them, Paul wrote the letter to rejoice with them and continue to strengthen them. 2 Thessalonians was written shortly after the first, around 51 AD. In this letter, Paul congratulates them for their love and patience in the face of difficulties, but he also had to correct them. Apparently, some of the Christians thought that the return of Jesus was imminent, meaning it was going to happen very soon. Paul explained that they should not worry about this and reminded them that they should continue living correctly while waiting for Christ's return. This shows that, although Paul was pleased with the faith of the Thessalonians, he was also careful that they did not follow incorrect ideas. Paul also wrote a letter to the Galatians, to the Christians in various cities in the region of Galatia. During his first and second missionary journeys, Paul had visited several of these cities, such as Antioch of Pisidia, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. However, after his visit, some people began teaching that Christians had to follow the law of Moses, such as circumcision, to be true Christians. This confused many, and Paul quickly found out. Concerned about what was happening, he wrote the letter to the Galatians to correct them and remind them that salvation is not based on following the law, but on faith in Jesus Christ. He probably wrote this letter from Corinth, although it is also possible he wrote it in Ephesus or Antioch. The main purpose of these letters was to give encouragement and correction. Paul knew that the new Christians faced many trials, such as persecutions and false teachings. So, he wrote to strengthen their faith, correct misunderstandings, and remind them of what really mattered, following Christ with all their heart. Additionally, since Paul's work was to travel and preach, he couldn't always be with them, so he used these letters to stay connected and take care of the churches he had founded. Well, these have been the practical answers about this week's congregation book study. I hope this is very helpful to you, my dear brothers and sisters. Sending a big hug, and may Jehovah always bless and protect you.